All right. So, well, my name is Draulio. You say Draulio in Portuguese. So I'm from Brazil, and I've I've um, I've graduated in physics. Did a master's in physics and then a PhD in physics applied to medicine and biology, and that's when I first started my interest with psychedelics during my PhD. During the PhD, I was working with neuroimaging tools, basically fMRI and magnetoencephalography. So I was coming from physics. So basically, I was doing research more on the development side of methods and strategies that you could apply those techniques. So on my PhD, I was applying these functional neuroimaging methods to different things. So we worked with epilepsy, with stroke, with memory, with emotional regulation, and things like this. And one of our interests was to start working with ayahuasca. So we started working with ayahuasca in 2006. Maybe it'd be interesting to tell you a little bit what ayahuasca is and how is it that we started working with it. So ayahuasca is a decoction. In other words, it's a mixing of two plants from the Amazon region. The leaves of one plant that's called Psychotria viridis, which is from the same family as the coffee tree. It looks like a coffee tree. So you have the leaves of Psychotria viridis being mixed with this vine, the bark of this vine that's called Banisteriopsis caapi. When you mix these two ingredients together on water and then you boil it for a number of hours, sometimes days, you come up with these brownish liquid that has a very typical taste, bitter, uh, sour, uh, kind of, uh, it's a very weird taste, very characteristic, I'd say. Um, and and this decoction was invented by the indigenous traditions and from the southern Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and all that region. So what's interesting there is that what the indigenous people found is something very intriguing, which is the leaves of Psychotria viridis contains this tryptamine, a very famous psychedelic tryptamine called NN-dimethyltryptamine or NN-DMT. But when you ingest NN-DMT, what happens is that NN-DMT is a monoamine, and as with any other monoamine, when you ingest a monoamine, it gets degraded by enzymes that we have in our guts. So it means that when you ingest DMT, it's not going to have any effect because all these enzymes, this monoamine oxidase that we have in our gut will deteriorate DMT. But the fact is that the other plant, the bark, has monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So when you mix these two plants, basically you have on one plant, it's rich in dimethyltryptamine, the psychedelic tryptamine, which is orally inactive. But then when you mix it with this other plant protects DMT from deamination in our stomach. So in other words, it protects the DMT from being deteriorated, and then it enters our bloodstream, and then it has all the central nervous system effects. Ayahuasca so it came from the Indians, and then in the 1920s in Brazil, there was this guy who's called Raimundo Irineu Serra, and well, it varies a lot. So the typical concentration of DMT in the leaf, it varies a lot. But and it varies also in the way that you cook the tea. So depending on how long you leave the tea for, you have you can extract more DMT from the leaves. But it is usually around 1 to 2% of dry material. This is the average amount of DMT in the leaves. Ayahuasca then came from the Indians, but this guy, Raimundo Irineu Serra, who's from the north of Brazil. Oh, hold on a second. Let me just find out if I have, if I can share this one slide with you. Hold on a second. Let me find it here. All right, I guess it will work. Just hold on a second. It will work. Cool. Okay, yeah, great. Okay, so, yeah, this, I'll go like this, would be better. So let me just show you a couple of pictures of what I'm talking about. Okay, so can you see the slide?
Yeah, we can.
All right, cool. So basically, these are the two trees that produce DMT. This one is the vine, Banisteriopsis capi, that basically you use the bark of the vine. And this is the Psychotria viridis. So for whoever have seen a coffee tree, you see that this looks just like coffee. And the leaves looks just like leaves from the coffee tree. These are the two substances or the two compounds that came in the ayahuasca batch. So on the leaves, you have this, which is dimethyltryptamine. And on the bark, you have these monoamine oxidase inhibitors. I'm sorry that the slides are in Portuguese, I just realized. But anyway, so these are the three main monoamine oxidase inhibitors that we have in the bark: harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine. So these are the three substances, mostly harmine and harmaline, that are there in the brew to protect DMT against deamination. This is when ayahuasca was first found. So this guy called Richard Spruce, an English explorer, an English ethnobotanist, he entered this expedition in the South America for 15 years. And this is the places where he went in the expedition. Basically, what he was looking for in this expedition was to try to relate different plants with different uses by indigenous populations. So basically, the guy was collecting plants all over the Amazon and then writing reports on which way those plants were being used. And one of these plants that he found was ayahuasca. So this is one of the first reports from science, between quotes, that we have of ayahuasca. So this guy, he found ayahuasca in two places in the Amazon region. One of them was right here in this Rio Uapes that you see here. And then he also found it right here in the Rio Pastaza. So, and he found these 4 years apart, meaning that he found that ayahuasca was being used by indigenous population in Brazil and in Peru, basically, but in a very structured way. So ayahuasca is used by indigenous population for very specific reasons, and the main one is as a medicine. So in Spanish you have, and in Portuguese you have that word curandeiro, which means the one who brings the cure. So the curandeiro in the tribe is the person who's specialized or who knows how to conduct ceremonies with different substances. So what Richard Spruce found was that the curandeiros were using ayahuasca basically as a medicine. this is the guy that I was just that I was telling you about before the presentation. So this guy is a son of slaves, born in 1892, and he was born in the northeast of Brazil. But then at some point in his life, he decided that he was going to go to the north of Brazil, become a rubber tapper. So rubber tapping was something in that period at the beginning of the 20th century was something very promising. So he goes there to the jungle, to the Amazon forest, starting as a rubber tapper. That doesn't work well, and then he started working for this Brazilian company that's there to have to define the borders between Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia. So he started working in the border between Brazil and Colombia, and there he found he found indigenous people using ayahuasca, but he also found in that very small village in Brazil some people using ayahuasca. And then in 1930, he creates this church that's called the Santo Daime Church, which is a church that still exists in Brazil. It's a church that still uses ayahuasca as their main sacrament. So today in Brazil, we have basically three main churches using ayahuasca. I'm sorry, let me just work this out a little bit here, just so it looks a little bit better. Hold on a second. Okay, all right. So you have the Santo Daime Church, which was created in 1930. You have the União do Vegetal, created in 1964, and the Barquinha, also created in 1964, 1965. So these religions in Brazil, they use ayahuasca ritually. They gather every 2 weeks. And just from one of the churches, the União do Vegetal, which is the one that's, I'd say, the most well organized from all of these three, they have 21,000 affiliates. So this is just so that you have an order of magnitude of how many people we have in Brazil that drinks ayahuasca regularly. I'd say that this number would go to around 50,000 if you have all the churches together, and they usually gather every 2 weeks. So the effects of ayahuasca is it's a liquid that you ingest, a liquid, and then it takes around 4 hours. All the effects of ayahuasca, the acute effects of ayahuasca, take around 4 hours. And that's interesting to mention. One thing that's interesting to mention is that DMT alone, as I told you, it does not have an effect when it's orally taken. But people have used DMT, mostly smoked DMT. But some studies have used both intravenous as well as intramuscular DMT. But in this case, if we compare DMT alone, isolated DMT, say for instance, in intravenous administration, usually the effects of DMT takes around 12 minutes, 12 to 20 minutes. Smoked DMT would take around 20 to 30 minutes. And here we have the same molecule, it's DMT. The difference is that you're taking it, the effects are coming from a different metabolism. So that means that the DMT, when you ingest in ayahuasca, it takes around 4 hours for the effects to increase. You start feeling the effects around 20 to 30 minutes after ingestion. It peaks around 1 to 2 hours after ingestion, and then 4 hours later, you're back to here. I mean, back to here, really, in the sense that a lot of the churches that use ayahuasca in Brazil, people drive to the church and drive back home. So it's different than alcohol. Then you'd say, well, you have a very long lasting effect of alcohol. Ayahuasca, for most people, when after the effects, your cognition is pretty much back to where we are right now. Maybe a little bit more lazy and you want to go to sleep, a little bit tired. but you're not confused. I mean, your thoughts are very similar to the ones that we are having right now. The effects of ayahuasca, the most well-known effects of ayahuasca are nausea and vomiting. So a lot of people vomit under the influence of ayahuasca. Some people have diarrhea. It's not a lot of people that has diarrhea, and most of people have nausea. So it's if you compare ayahuasca with other psychedelics, I'd say that ayahuasca is the one that leads you to the most um, internal kind of experience, in the sense that ayahuasca is very challenging. It's very challenging from a lot of the physical aspects of the effects, including vomiting and nausea. So that means that ayahuasca, in some sense, the level of concentration that a lot of people has under the influence of ayahuasca is a lot higher, or somehow higher, than with other psychedelics like LSD, for instance. So I like to compare LSD with ayahuasca in the sense that from all the psychedelics, in my opinion, LSD is the one that the world outside still very attracting. The outside world becomes very beautiful, colors, beauty. So those are aspects that are very important under LSD, but under ayahuasca, those are not very important aspects of the experience. So a lot of the experience is dominated inwards. A lot of the experience with ayahuasca, it, a lot of times when you are under the influence of ayahuasca, you want to open your eyes, but there's no way you have the energy to open your eyes. So it's a really inward driven kind of experience that you feel that you have to concentrate in some sense in order to control somehow the nausea, to control vomiting, not to control, that's not the good word, but to comply with those effects, so to say. Um, so it's a psychedelic substance, so it has all the psychedelic effects, but with ayahuasca, most the visual effects come with eyes closed. It's very rare to have a visual effect with eyes open, besides some distortion, space distortion, colored, brightens color, and things like this. But the visions that a lot of people has under the influence of ayahuasca are visions that come about with your eyes closed. So the phenomenology of ayahuasca, I'd say it's somehow similar to the phenomenology of a dreamlike state in which you have your eyes closed, you have visions. Those visions seem very real, just as a dream. So uh, uh, we wake up from nightmares. So that's a proof of saying that when we are asleep, uh, having a nightmare, in that moment, our consciousness believe that that's true, that's real. And then when we wake up, we say, well, that was just a nightmare. With ayahuasca, I'd say it's similar in a way. The difference there is that when you wake up from the experience, you don't wake up with the feeling that that was not real. I'd say that this was, to me, the most intriguing aspect of my first experience with ayahuasca in 2005. Was the fact that once I came back from the experience, I realized that somehow the connection line between that state of consciousness and this state of consciousness was not broken, as it happens with dreams. So when we wake up from a dream, we don't have a close connection between this ordinary state of consciousness and our dream state. So those two states are somehow disconnected. And then when we do the transition from one to the other, we feel that that state was unreal, was just a dream. So the other effects of ayahuasca that are very interesting are the long-lasting effects, and I'd say that those are some of the effects that we are most interested in. So our research basically are twofold with ayahuasca. The first one is to use neuroimaging techniques to understand the effects of ayahuasca in the brain while you are under the acute influence of ayahuasca. So we have a couple of experiments in which we had individuals coming to the lab, individuals with a lot of experience with ayahuasca, coming to the lab and doing an fMRI study. So these are some of the studies that we have been doing with ayahuasca, just to mention one line of research that we have. So basically, in this line of research, we used fMRI and then have people under the influence of ayahuasca being inside the scanner and then perform a task. For instance, in this one, they were performing a visual task. What we've shown in this experiment here is basically the fact that when people are under the influence of ayahuasca, you have three main brain regions when they are under the influence of ayahuasca, trying to imagine something. So in this experiment, we were interested in the visual aspects, the visual phenomenology of ayahuasca. So that, you know, in ayahuasca, in the tradition use of ayahuasca, they have a special name for the visions. They called it miração. It's like a mirage. So this is a very important aspect of the experience in general for the ritual use of ayahuasca. So this was one of the reasons why we were interested in understanding what. So when people are having this mirage, when people are having these visual experiences, what happens in the brain? So what we see here is three clues, basically, of what might be happening in the brain. The first one, the first row that you see are the higher activations we found in the visual system. So in other words, what we see here is that your visual system is highly activated when you are under the influence of ayahuasca, very similar to what happens when you are with your eyes open looking at something. So what we are seeing here is that the activity of the visual cortex is indistinguishable when I compare eyes open, perceiving something, or eyes closed under the influence of ayahuasca. So this is a clue and evidence that points to the fact that people are seeing something. The second row here, so in this, in this second row here, what we see is that a lot of the centers, so these areas of the brain, which we call the mesiotemporal lobe or the hippocampus, the amygdala, the parahippocampal gyrus, all these regions were also highly activated under the influence of ayahuasca, and all these centers have been related with memory, for instance. And then on the bottom row, you see these activity on the frontal area, which is the frontal polar cortex. And the frontal polar cortex have been highly associated with awareness, with processes that are related to awareness. For instance, the orbital frontal cortex, the activity of the orbital frontal cortex changes when you are having a lucid dream, which is a dream that you're lucid, that you're having. A lot of people has had that experience of having a lucid dream. So this makes sense because basically what we are seeing here is that when you are under the influence of ayahuasca and you are seeing something, basically you're seeing something, and a lot of what you're seeing comes from your memory. And you need the awareness to your thoughts, to your memories, to your emotions. And this is part of the reason why you have the frontal polar cortex being activated in that system. I'm not going to go into the details of the studies, but just to let you know that this is another line of research that we are doing, looking for networks. So what are the changes of ayahuasca in different brain networks? So not only for a specific task, but what are the brain networks that change under the influence of ayahuasca? So for instance, the default network or the salience network that I'm showing here. And we also have been looking at more general, what are the more broad changes that happens in the brain. And one things that we have been seeing is that under the influence of ayahuasca, very similar to psilocybin that you see on this bottom slide here on the right. The left here is under the influence of a placebo, and on the right is under the influence of psilocybin. This is very similar to what we see in ayahuasca, which is what you see here on the left, which is the following. Under the influence of ayahuasca, the brain seems to be more loose in a sense, and loose in the sense that we are measuring here is entropy. So entropy, and what we measure here is the fact that the connections between different brain areas increase their entropy. In other words, you have people being connected to more other neurons when you are under the influence of ayahuasca. So the interpretation for this, for instance, is the idea that under the influence of ayahuasca, things that are not possible become possible, like a dream. So your brain is more free to perceive or to interpret different stimuli in different ways. So this is an overview of the studies that we have been doing with neuroimaging. And then just so the second line of research that we are interested is testing ayahuasca in the lab as an antidepressant. So we conducted a number of clinical trials in patients that has treatment-resistant depression. And those are patients who have tried already two different medications, two different antidepressant medications from different classes, and that hasn't worked. So in the first study, basically what we did was to recruit 6 patients with treatment-resistant depression to the hospital. None of these patients had previous experience with ayahuasca or with any other psychedelics. They all had moderate to severe depression when on the time of the trial. And then they were recruited to take part in a single session with ayahuasca in the lab. So they would come to the lab, they would have a single session with ayahuasca, and we would monitor their depressive symptoms before, during, and after the acute effects of ayahuasca, which is what you see here in this graph. This graph here shows basically 2 scales that measures the severity of depression. So the higher the number, the more severe the depression is. And in the x-axis, what you see is time. So here is minus 10 minutes. So 10 minutes before the ingestion. This is 40 minutes after, 80 minutes after, 140 minutes after, 180 minutes after. This is 1 day after, 7 days after, 14 days after, and 21 days after. So what we saw in this trial is a very significant and rapid antidepressant effect of ayahuasca. Rapid in the sense that we already saw an antidepressant effect of ayahuasca 1 day after the dosing. And this is really interesting because most of all the antidepressants that we have in the market, they take around or at least 2 weeks in order to have a benefit, a first therapeutic effect kicking in. So because of this preliminary effects in 7 patients, we increased the sample to 17. What you see here is another trial with 17 patients. What you see in the left are the symptoms of depression. So let's pay attention, concentrate in these 2 here that basically measure the symptoms of depression. And again, in this first part, you see the acute effect, so minutes. And then the second part, you see days. Again, compared to baseline, so compared to how they entered the trial, they were much better. 1 day, 7 days, 14 days, and 21 days. And then we did the last one, which is the randomized controlled trial. So in this randomized controlled trial, we had 29 patients. Half had a session with ayahuasca, the other half had a session with placebo. This is the hospital that we work at. So this is the hospital where all the trials, all the clinical trials took place. This is the randomized trial. I'm not going to go into details. So just to let you know of one thing, the randomized trial is a trial in which half of the patients had the ayahuasca and half of the patients had the placebo. So it's very challenging to do a randomized trial with psychedelics. How is it that you're going to convince someone who had an ayahuasca experience that that experience was out of a placebo? You're not going to do it. There's no way someone who had an ayahuasca experience will say, well, I think that was a placebo. And in fact, all the patients that we had in our trial that went through an ayahuasca session, when we asked at the end, do you think that you had an ayahuasca or a placebo? 100% said, I think I had ayahuasca. So what are the strategies that we can adopt to do a randomized trial with a psychedelic? So basically what you could do is to trick the people that had the placebo to make them think that they had the placebo. The people that had the placebo, make them think that they had ayahuasca. So to do that, we constructed a placebo, which is what you see here in this picture. It's brown. It has a bitter and a sour taste that comes from citric acid and zinc sulfate. One zinc sulfate is bitter, citric acid is sour. And then we had caramel corn and beer yeast to have a kind of dust kind of taste that ayahuasca has. And the interesting thing here is that zinc sulfate, besides being bitter, it also produces minor to moderate gastrointestinal distress, which means that it produces nausea, it produces vomiting, and in one of our subjects, we had diarrhea from a placebo. So basically what we tried to do here is to convince people in the placebo group that they had ayahuasca. And in fact, if you look at the results, so this is the setting. This is where people took ayahuasca in the trial. It's like a kind of a hospital bedroom, but it's different than most of the settings that you see out there. There's a lot of psychedelic information in the room. We decided to go with a very clear but comfortable room. That's basically our decision for the trial. And these are the results here. So what you see in red are the effects of ayahuasca, and what you see in blue are the effects of the placebo. So you do see that, again, one day after the session, there's a highly significant antidepressant effect of ayahuasca. There was also a very significant antidepressant effect of placebo, like you see here. But the antidepressant effect of ayahuasca was higher, especially 7 days after the session. So if we look at 7 days after the session, we see that the placebo group started to get back worse, while the group that had the ayahuasca session kept their improvement after 7 days after the session. So yeah, I guess that with this, you guys can have a pretty good idea of without going into too much details. You guys can have a pretty good idea of what are the lines of research that we do with ayahuasca, what are our interests with ayahuasca and things like this. So then, with that, I'm open for questions or for anything that you guys are curious about.
Yeah, I have a question. So you said that ayahuasca makes people pretty nauseous and sometimes have like diarrhea or even throwing up. Do you think that kind of challenging experience contributes to the therapeutic effects, or does it kind of distract from the experience?
That's very interesting, because one first hypothesis we had is that maybe the purging and the difficulty during the session might improve the benefit, a later benefit, but that was not the case. So if we look, for instance, for people that threw up, they were not the ones who presented, or that had nausea, they were not the ones who presented the best improvement after the ayahuasca session. So, but one thing, Frank, that's very clear to us is that in that trial we had 29 patients with treatment-resistant depression, but we also had 50 control individuals who went through the same trial. And one thing that was very clear to us was that the patients with depression, they had a tendency to suffer a lot more during the session than our group of healthy individuals. So there is a relationship for sure between the sets. In other words, the fact that that individual has a very significant and severe depression with the experience, in a sense that it looks like, it seems as though that the patients had a higher suffering than the control group. But we did not find any correlation between people that suffered or that had a more purging effect got better. One thing, Frank, that's important to say here is that the traditions that use ayahuasca, they do not consider these purging, these effects as sorry, what do you call it? Oh, I'm sorry. Side effect. Sorry. So they don't consider that as a side effect. They consider that as a purging process that in fact can be, as you said, important for the therapeutic process. But in our data, we did not find it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was really intriguing.
I was wondering, when you were studying the indigenous use of ayahuasca, how often these indigenous groups would partake in the consuming of ayahuasca, because your study was based on a single dose, but if you're taking it more than once or more often.
That's really, yeah, that's really interesting. And especially because, well, I have two answers. The first one is that there is a big difference between how indigenous people use ayahuasca as compared to how urban people use ayahuasca in a more religious setting. So for the urban centers, for these more religious settings, they use every 2 weeks. So they use it as a religion that, like Catholics gather every Sunday. The Santo Daime members gather every 2 weeks. But they gather in a church for a spiritual purpose. When you go for an indigenous use, ayahuasca is used for, I mean, if you think already the main use of ayahuasca, there is no point of using ayahuasca in a more regular way. In other words, if you use ayahuasca as a medicine, as the curandero does in a tribe, basically what the curandero is doing is to bring the medicine together with all the spiritual work that he's working with to that patient. But they also use it for war. They use it for very weird reasons. So you have the head of the indigenous tribe using ayahuasca to foresee the future. So say you have an issue with your tribe that you have to figure out a way out of it. So ayahuasca, it's called a teacher plant, as other teacher plants, in the sense that it's also used to teach something to the user. And sometimes it teaches related to a question that the leader of the tribe has with regards to something that's going on in the tribe. So that is to tell you that in the indigenous use of ayahuasca, there is no such a thing as use ayahuasca every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, or so they use ayahuasca in different rituals. So you have a feast, then you use ayahuasca for that specific reason, or for to celebrate something, or to cure someone, or to foresee the future. So in a lot of these communities, ayahuasca actually, Noah, is the center of the community. So, and this there are communities in Brazil that have been created around ayahuasca and that are not indigenous. So there are the Mapiá community, for instance, which is a community with 1,400 people. It's a community that was created in the 70s. So you have people that were born in that community that now have traveled somewhere else. But in those communities, then they use ayahuasca regularly as a religion. So the use of ayahuasca, I'd say it varies a lot between the indigenous traditions and the more urban traditions. But for sure, independently of whether you're using it in an indigenous tradition or in an urban tradition, you're right in saying that we just tested a single intervention. It was not a treatment. It was just a single intervention with ayahuasca or placebo. So for sure, the next steps would be to test it in a longer term, thinking of ayahuasca as a treatment, not as a single intervention.
Okay, thanks for that great answer. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. There's some questions in the chat. The first question is, what concentration is DMT found in the leaf?
Oh, I guess that one I've answered during the yeah. Okay.
And then the second question is, has there been a study on how the effects of ayahuasca as a decoction compared to an equivalent solution of DMT and MAO inhibitors?
No, not really. So this people have been calling this pharma ayahuasca, which is basically the mixing of DMT with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. But no, every study that we have, it's with ayahuasca produced using the two plants with decoction and produced by the churches. Yes. So the second question, the answer is yes. There is one study that we have been planning that we are about to submit to the IRB, which is to use isolated DMT in patients with treatment-resistant depression to compare against the results that we have with ayahuasca. So the second question is, the answer is yes.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking. I actually have a couple questions, if that's good with you.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. The first one was, how did they measure the depression score? Did they take an MRI and then look at the chemicals being produced in the brain?
No. So what you do is to have a trained psychiatrist evaluating the symptoms by both having the patient respond to specific questions and then have a kind of a Likert scale from 1 to 5. How sad do you feel? From 1 to 5, how well did you sleep last night? From 1 to 5, like this. And also the second part of the scale is more of an observational score, which comes from the observation from the psychiatrist to observing the patient. So the score is a combination between the self-report and the psychiatrist evaluation of the patient, and then you have a score. But one thing, Ellen, is that those scales, they're not used clinically. They're just used as a research tool. So in other words, when you have a patient coming to the hospital, You don't use those scales to say, well, this patient has very severe depression, this one has moderate depression, and so on. So depression is still a condition that the diagnosis is basically yes or no. Or then you have what you call treatment-resistant depression. So here I can tell you one thing that's very important to tell you guys, which is, so when you look for a first treatment for depression, you have around 50% of chance to respond to the first treatment. And that I'm talking about antidepressant drugs. If you do not respond to the first treatment and you look for the second treatment, your chance is reduced to 30%. If you look for the third treatment, your chance is reduced to 10 to 15%. To a point that, so treatment-resistant depression patients are the ones who has 10% of chances of responding to any antidepressant medication that we have in the market. So what are the alternatives? Basically three for treatment-resistant depression. The first one is psychotherapy. The second one is electroconvulsive therapy. And the third one is ketamine. So ketamine was just given as a breakthrough, just given permission by the FDA as a breakthrough treatment for treatment-resistant depression. Exactly because we need something that works better than, I mean, if we are using electroconvulsive therapy, that means something, right? In our minds, I mean, that means that we don't have a lot of resources. If we're doing that, and people are paying, you know, that's not a cheap procedure. So and that means that you don't have a lot of options out there. So yeah, I'm sorry for the long answer.
Got you. No, thank you. That was really interesting. And then just one more kind of a joint question. I had two, but I don't want to take up too much time. Basically, how did you make the placebo patients hallucinate, or was the whole point that they're not hallucinating, or like
they did not? Yeah, they did not. So we need a placebo that did not have a psychedelic effect, because otherwise we'd be comparing a psychedelic against another psychedelic.
Okay,
Yes.
got you. And then finally, real quick, why do you think that ayahuasca is going to be better than other psychedelics, like others?
That's a really cool question. Yeah, because usually when we talk about psychedelics, we think of psychedelics as one thing, right? We say, what are psychedelic? Well, psychedelics are substances that, and then we list, so that has a powerful agonism in serotonin, that does not have tolerance, that has mystical experiences when taken at high doses, and all those. But then when we go a little bit into the fine grain of what psychedelics are, we see that actually each psychedelic has a very different effect. So you find people that from the ayahuasca communities, for instance, that don't like any other psychedelic. Or you have people that use other psychedelics, for instance, LSD, in a regular basis. And when they have their first experience with ayahuasca, they will hate it. So there are a lot of differences between the experiences that these substances bring up, in a sense that, you know, so smoke DMT is a 20 minutes experience, a very fast roller coaster. Ayahuasca is a 4-hour experience, still a fast roller coaster, but it's a lot easier in one sense than an NDMT, for instance. So, and here we are talking about the same substance. The difference is just the route of administration. So, you know, meaning that I do see that these substances then might be good for some conditions for some people. So in other words, you have, you know, ayahuasca might be better for some people. Psilocybin might be better for other people, just because there are these differences. And then we have to find out, science has to find out, what are the groups of people that will respond better to one or the other, I'd say.
Okay, thank you so much for.
Sure, yeah, you're welcome.
We just had one question.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Chat.
So which psychedelic has been shown to have the most impressive antidepressant effects, right? I'd say that there are only 2 psychedelics that has been tested as antidepressants. As a matter of fact, our trial is the only one randomized placebo-controlled trial with a psychedelic substance in treatment-resistant depression. So in treatment-resistant depression, there's no other study to compare against. But what we see is that when you try in different conditions, so there are studies with psychedelics and distress that is brought about by end-of-life illnesses. So people with end-of-life illnesses, they very often develop anxiety and depression. So psychedelic psilocybin basically has been tested in these patients in order to reduce depression and anxiety. And psilocybin has been tested in treatment-resistant depression, but with an open label trial, similar to our previous study. But all these studies, they show one thing that's very interesting, which is a rapid antidepressant effect, which means that one day after the dosing, you already have an antidepressant effect, which is pretty amazing if we compare against any other antidepressant. Yeah, LSD is a very long roller coaster for sure, but it's a roller coaster that you ride with your eyes open most of the time. While ayahuasca, I'd say it's a faster roller coaster, and I wouldn't say a faster, but a more challenging roller coaster. So it's fast is not the only variable in the roller coaster does your roller coaster do 1 loop, 2 loops in the sequence? Exactly, yeah. So I'd say that ayahuasca is a very particular roller coaster, especially because the physical effects. I'd say that this is a very specific effect of ayahuasca. So in one sense, ayahuasca somehow protects itself from, I wouldn't say protect. I would say that ayahuasca contains its use to a more limited number of settings. It's, I mean, if you want to take a psychedelic and go to a party, I'd say that from all you could choose, ayahuasca would not be the first one in your list. So in that sense, ayahuasca somehow it restricts the intention. So for every psychedelic, I'd say that one thing that we bring in every study in our clinical trials, we bring from the traditions that say that for psychedelics, you need to have an intention. So before you go on a psychedelic experience, you need to understand why you're going on that experience. So you need to have an intention. So I'd say that this is very important. And in the ayahuasca experience, then the number of intentions get limited. Just because you know that, well, I do not intend to use ayahuasca and do anything in the outside world, in other words. I intend to use ayahuasca and then do this navigation to the inside, having hardly any connection to other people. It's myself with myself. One thing I just remembered to mention to you guys, which is interesting, is where the effects came from. So this is a very typical question. Where do you, you guys were asking now, if people that suffered more had a more significant effect. So where the effects come from? This is one thing that we need to understand. And a lot of the people that participated in the trial, they would say, well, I got better because it fused that I participated in 3 years of psychotherapy in 4 hours. I had 3 years of psychotherapy in 4 hours. So we had a number of patients saying, I'm clear that you know, my improvement got here from those psychotherapy processes that I had to live through. But then other people would say, I hated the experience for the same reason I hate psychotherapy. So even there, you see, even there, you have the same mechanism, kind of mechanism, having two completely different outputs in two different people. So it's like, it's not everyone that likes roller coaster, right? So maybe, I mean, we have the tendency, a lot of people that have very significant experiences under the influence of psychedelics tend to believe that experience as something unique and as something very revealing, that from then on, your world, your perspective, your objectives, everything has changed. But in my opinion, I understand that we have to consider one thing. Hold on a second. Let me just find this quote here that I really like. Hold on a second. Just here we go. So, have you guys ever heard of a guy called Alan Watts? It's a very cool guy, and he says the following. Maybe you guys know that quote, but it says, "If you get the message, hang up the phone. For psychedelic drugs are simply instruments like microscopes, telescopes, and telephones. The biologist does not sit with eyes permanently glued to the microscope. He goes away and works on what he has seen." Man, this is just, to me, is exactly what a psychedelic experience means. It's not that you should go there and come back and believe that as the absolute truth or the absolute reality. In the ayahuasca community, there is one saying that I love. I'm going to translate, and of course that's not going to make as sense as it is as it does in Portuguese, but basically they say a mirage is a vacillation. A vacillation in the sense that you cannot get stuck once you have the vision. You have to understand that the truth is behind the vision. The vision is there just as a mirage to make you believe that that's true. Man, again, you know, it's just to understand that it's a pursue. You're pursuing something. Oh, it's not that you've up at one point oh my God, I found something. You won't find anything. It's just a matter of keep going. And then if you look at something and then you say, oh my goodness, that looks like an amazing reality. All the rest doesn't make sense. Anything, it is somehow to understand that, you know, psychedelic substances are there to make a difference in this world, not there in the world that you go when you are under the influence of ayahuasca or under the influence of psychedelics. The contact with death, for instance, the idea that you had the contact with the experience of what would be dying like. All those experiences, they are very transformative for sure. But in my opinion, you have to keep on questioning all these experiences and not believing any one of them. Come back, understand, and then maybe ayahuasca from other psychedelics, it also has this very interesting difference, which is people, when they come back from the experience with ayahuasca, a lot of people come back with the intuition that they have to devote their energy to life, that they have to devote their energy to this very special moment that we are right now, which is being alive. When we are under the influence of psychedelics, we are somehow intuitively understanding maybe what's on the other side, but the other side is there. We don't have to care about it. We have to care about this experience here. And then this is what Alan Watts is talking about. I mean, when you go there, you have to come back and realize, how do you gonna change? How do you gonna integrate that experience into this ordinary world? And then change the life of, and then have a better humans maybe in the future. Who knows? I mean, we have a potential interesting future, but for sure, and we have the feeling that what happened in the 60s and in the 70s is basically you are in the ship, in a huge ship, and then all of a sudden you realize that we are going in a direction that's not the right one. As a society, we say, well, society is going in a totally crazy direction, believing in things that there's no sense of believing in those things. So then all of a sudden you have access to something that seems to be more real than what society is paying attention to. And then when you come back, you say, well, I know things that you don't know. That's the mistake. That's the mistake. The mistake is putting yourself in a place of being someone that has a different experience or whatever. So anyway, I'm sorry again. This is just to say that, in my opinion, this is what psychedelics are about, is to have the experience and then come back and then integrate that experience here in life.
Thank you for talking. Yeah, it was all really interesting. We all really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody else that came to listen, and for all the great questions.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure. Thank you.